But we'd like to open up to Q&A. And when we get done, I think we will ask our panelists for some final comments. And I don't have anything in the chat at this moment. So I think I'll start. One of the things that, as I was listening to the 4 panelists, I thought about wanting to learn more. 10 minutes is truly not a long time. And so I wondered if each of the panelists might want to recommend where they get some of their information from, or places where, in particular, Americans could be learning a little bit more. Maybe you've got a favorite. I think the Venezuelan Chronicles is one of them. But if there are other resources that we could be looking at and watching, because it's, you know, it's currently not something that's at the forefront of American news media. So if we'd like to know more, and because you're first up, Luis, on my list of people, maybe I'll ask you if you might have a recommendation for somewhere that we could go to learn a little bit more.
Well, I could comment that digital media in Venezuela, we have very brave journalists with independent media, and they are doing an effort to have information in English. This is the case of Armando.info and Efecto Cocuyo. They have some information in English, and I think they are very good sources of information, of news and information, and chronics.
Thank you. Any of our other panelists have something you'd recommend?
In my case, the information, I mean, I can send you the URL of the work we have been doing with my colleagues, trying to keep alive those heroes that we have there in Venezuela.
Yeah, so probably what I could add there for information, I mean, I think, well, I can send to Claudia at some point some of this, but there is an important internet website from Stanford University listing all, well, at least some of them, the most important accused of corruption in Venezuela. It's an independent site. It's quite an interesting one. There is a massive amount of information in the website of the Organization of American States. The recent report that that was referred to, the United Nations report on violations of human rights, indicating that high-level officers of the Venezuelan regime have participated in crimes against humanity and human rights. It is also there. There is also a massive report, a very extensive one, from the Organization of Human Rights of the United Nations, because the one Tulio was referring to is an independent, it's a report ordered by the Assembly. So there's a fact-finding mission in Venezuela, but there is a previous one on violations of human rights in Venezuela. And well, there is the U.S. Congress decision, you know, regarding the Venezuelan regime. There are several bills and that have been approved by the U.S. Congress. There is also the State Department. So it's a question that that one starts looking for this. But the other thing, there are I don't know, 10, probably 20 books written in the last years about Venezuela by Mexicans, Colombians, even the case of John Bolton's book, a recent book, The Room Where It All Happened. The previous security advisor to the Trump's administration. There is also important information there about Venezuela. And one thing that I wanted to indicate, I know that eventually we will have the opportunity to talk about some of the things, but I wanted to refer to the last comment Luis Núñez made about we Venezuelans being responsible for what happened. This is true, and it has been recognized by, in several books written by Venezuela, but we have to understand that we are responsible for what happened in Venezuela. Yes, and I take responsibility, even though I was never supportive of Chavez, not even in the beginning. But at the same time, I insist that it is true that we Venezuelans are responsible, but it is very hard for a country the same way. I mean, my favorite example is France. When France was occupied by the Nazis and there was the Vichy Republic, France had no chance whatsoever of getting out of that situation without the involvement of the Allies. It is not quite the same situation, but I have made the comparison in several of my writings about these two things, but that's not the only case. So we need to understand that the two things are true. It's not one of them is true and the other is not. So I just wanted to mention this because I think it's a very important clarification. So I took a couple of minutes to say that.
Okay, thank you.
I would like to comment two things. To put here two anecdotes. One that reinforced the talk of Marielba. I was very close to the Chagas outbreak that Mariela told us in Venezuela. From the technology park in Mérida, we got a funding from the health ministry to study this outbreak. I mean, in fact, not to study this outbreak, but to make a kit to diagnose the Chagas disease in a very precise and easy way. And then we organized a whole project around this kit because we have to distribute this kit in a country. And we got a lot of information from the field. And we discovered that the Chagas has moved from the countryside to the cities. And the rats become the host of the trypanosomas. And then we start to have some statistics about this. And we have a presentation with the government, and afterwards the project was canceled. And we have to put all this information. In fact, we have those information very in a separate and a secure place. But right now there is a lot of Chagas in the barrios in Caracas. This is, and the second anecdote in this way is the food nutritional report that you mentioned. That was subcontracted to a research group in Mérida, in Universidad de los Andes, and from a group agroalimentaria research group in particular. And it was also canceled in the 2014, simple as that. And the group trying to keep some of the statistic to use somewhere. And the end is, I agree with you, Vladimiro, that how we are going to solve this problem is another thing that we have to discuss, and this is another problem. But the point is that we were not invaded by the Martians. We ourselves did most of the job. And I didn't vote for Chavez and the Chavismo, no way.
All right. We do have some questions that are starting to show up on the chat, and if it's okay, I'd like to start working on those. I do have one person, Santiago, he has several questions. And so we're going to get him actually to, whoops, get him unmuted.
I am,
You're there?
yes.
Okay.
In addition to the questions that all of you can see on the chat, I have two more. One is why is it that most of the Venezuelan immigrants who come to the United States are white, as opposed to being a representation of the demographic diversity in the country? And my second question that's not in the chat, all the questions that are in the chat you can all see, is when there was a dictatorship in Cuba, the exiles in Puerto Rico and in the United States and in Mexico organized an army to overthrow the dictatorship in Cuba of Batista. The Dominicans in Puerto Rico, in Cuba, in Mexico, and in Haiti tried to do the same with Trujillo. When is it that the Venezuelan migrants are going to put an army together if you think that you have the support of the people to overthrow what you call the dictatorship in Venezuela, as opposed to asking the United States to do it for you, which by Latin American standards is treason?
Okay.
Yeah. I would like to ask if the person that is asking, Santiago,
Yes.
if you have some information, some data about what is the ethnicity of the immigrants, of Venezuelan immigrants. I can say that
The ones who come to the United States, whether
exactly.
to
If you
Florida
have
or
some
to New
data.
York, that's different from the Venezuelan migrants who go to Colombia. I'm well aware of the difference, but what I'm asking is about the Venezuelan immigrants who come to the United States. Why is it that they are not representative of the racial and class diversity, which is evident not just in Venezuela, but in every other country in the Caribbean, where most of the people are of African origin?
Well, Venezuela is a country very diverse, but I want to know if you have some data, because I think the diversity of Venezuelan population many times is not so clear. For example, here in Michigan, I could meet people. What happened in United States is that everybody is Latino. And then it's impossible to say, okay, I am white or I am, I don't know, because it's impossible for people that in Venezuela see themselves as white. Here in the United States, they see that they are not really white. And then it's something that for many people is shocking. And I know that. But I don't have really data to say that it's a ethnicity about others. I don't know if you have this impression, because maybe the population in some parts of the United States, and I am curious about that.
Well, I will combine it with a comment that Mujica made. I have not seen in any city in the United States large contingents of Venezuela marching in the Black Lives Matters protests that have been taking place in this country since 2007.
Yeah. Can I say something there?
Of course.
Yeah. So Santiago, I think you are asking a very interesting question, and I would like to clarify. I don't know if I will have the time to clarify all the issues you are raising. The first one regarding ethnicity. If you compare Venezuela to the other countries in the Caribbean, and there are huge differences there. I mean, Venezuela is not the case of a country like Chile or Argentina, where there is a large majority, let's say, of Hispanics / white people. We are really racially mixed substantially. You are right in saying that probably the ethnicity profile of Venezuelans coming to the United States, it's more inclined, even though there are, I mean, there is everything, there's a bit of everything in the States too, but if you compare immigration going into Colombia and the immigration going into Brazil or Peru or Ecuador, it is certainly different. And the difference has to do with the fact that it's not so much race. It's the Venezuelans that who come to the United States, they are professionally in a, let's say, in a better position, because just to get to the States, you have to fly. And to fly, I mean, now there are some Venezuelans, not that many, coming through Central America. And they are coming, including to Arizona and any neighboring states. So the difference is much in the level of education and the level of income. The first wave of Venezuelans who immigrated from the country were essentially professionals. So they went to Spain, they went to part of them to Colombia, part of them to the United States. So it is not so much that. Now, you're asking another very important question. Many Venezuelans in the United States, they are, it is not my case, but I want to take your question head on, because I think I understand what you're asking. Many Venezuelans in the United States, they are supportive in this particular situation of Trump's government. And there is a huge discussion, and it's a very important rift in the Venezuelan community. Those who believe that it would be, the Venezuelan cause will be better served by Trump's triumph in the coming election as opposed to Biden. And this has a lot to do with the kind of questions you are asking, because by obvious reasons, they, if you ask Venezuelan whether they want to support Black Lives Matter, then it comes the question. And then I'm going to ask you that question. To what extent is Black Lives Matter, it's a movement that only pretends to resolve discrimination issues in this country, as opposed to empowering resentment? And I know that you are going to realize the direction which this question is asking, because you are asking a question that seems very concrete about many things, and in reality, it has some ideological implications, and very much on how you want to see this and how. So, to try to give a short answer to your question, I don't think the difference of the Venezuelans in the United States has anything to do with race. It has to do with means, professional means, and the fact that to get into this country requires, and this is what happened, that this Venezuelan community in the States, it's professionally better equipped, let's put it that way, and economically better equipped than Venezuelans going into some other countries. The other questions you are asking are, and I want to finish with this, in my opinion, Venezuelans, we need to understand that the best that can happen to our country is that the support from the United States is a bipartisan support. I don't think we gain anything by supporting the polarization that is happening in this country and pretending that there is something better about Trump or Biden. We need to gain the support of the American people and of any American government. And we have been, many of us have been very adamant and insisting that it has to be bipartisan, and we need the support of people, Congress, and the US administration. The last question you asked, so how come we don't have an army? Well, again, you are putting the history in terms that need to be clarified. it is true that there was an invasion to Cuba, strongly supported by the Kennedy administration in Bahía de Cochinos. And that invasion at the very last moment, support stopped, and the Cubans actually defeated this invasion. So the issue of an invasion to Venezuela is a very contentious one, because it's not a question, it's not a simple question of whether to organize this type of invasion. It's whether that will be the best solution for the country. And it's not a question of trying to defeat the government. And so you're saying, okay, so how come the Venezuelans, if they think they're majority? We are the majority. Tested by any, I mean, people who want to restore democracy, we are the majority in the country. Now, that's one thing. A different thing is whether that majority wants to resolve this situation resorting to violence, which is what you are asking. And that's a very delicate question. I know I'm not addressing all the full scope of your question, because you ask very many important things, but with a twist, a political twist. So, but I just wanted to leave it there.
Okay, and I think, yeah, Tulio wanted to also comment on that. Tulio, you need to unmute.
Sí. Claudio, ¿me puedes ayudar con la traducción?
Te traduzco.
No es necesario, yo entiendo español.
No, pero por si acaso hay alguien que no. O sea, solamente quiero puntualizar 3 cosas. 1, en Venezuela nunca existió el racismo en los mismos términos en que existió y existe en el resto del Caribe.
Let me I would like to make 3 points. Venezuela, unlike other Caribbean countries, has not suffered from explicit racism.
Eso solo lo puede decir.
Existió, ¿me puede permitir?
And you allow me to speak.
Existe lo que la sociología americana llama colorismo, que son formas de discriminación asociadas a color de la piel y clase social.
This is what in America you call colorism, which is associated to the color of the skin.
Este régimen trató de inocular una fragmentación racial.
This regime imposed a racial discrimination.
Y creó la figura de los afrovenezolanos, tratando de convertirla en algo análogo a los que se hace en Estados Unidos.
The regime created the figure of Afro-Venezuelan, which it was a little bit a copy of what in the US they call Afro-American. This did not exist in Venezuela before, that figure.
Y cuando se incluyó en el censo que la gente se definiera si era afrovenezolano, menos del 2% en un censo oficial declaró asumirse como tales.
And in the census that took place, in which they asked for the first time for racial questions, less than 2% call themselves Afro-Venezuelans.
Y con relación a los ejércitos, es muy importante lo que dijo Vladimiro. En la mayor parte de la población venezolana quiere resolver por vía democrática, no violenta y no intervención americana nuestros problemas.
When you talk about the armies, I think what is clear among many Venezuelans is that they want to solve the problem in a pacific, democratic way. We are not calling for intervention from the US or from other countries, but to somehow manage to solve the problems, to find the solutions in a democratic, pacific manner.
Y por último, aclarar que hay una estratificación de clases en la migración. A mayor cercanía, más pobre el migrante. A mayor distancia, requiere de cierta inversión, de pasajes aéreos y de cierta legalidad. Los pobres, que son la mayoría de los migrantes, vienen a Colombia, a Perú y caminan a pie y son mendigos en las calles de Colombia.
Lastly, the last point I wanted to make is that when you talk about migrants, there is a definite stratification. The closer, the poorer. If you want to really go a long distance to a faraway place, that will require investment, connections, that will actually be able to get you there. So what you find is that in most neighboring countries, you have Venezuelans that didn't have any money, so they had to go on foot, and they are beggars in the streets. So there is that differentiation among the
Gracias.
immigrants. Thank you, Tulio.
Okay, I did have the chat set up where it was only going privately to the host, and I'm not sure if our co-hosts were seeing some of those also coming from Santiago, but we are going to send two more questions over from Claudio, and then I have Santiago, I've copied and pasted 2 of the 3 additional questions for the panelists to consider. And I'm going to go ahead and have Claudio ask his questions. All right?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would like to ask, I mean, if you could talk a little bit about 2 issues. One is of the political prisoners, the disappearance of people, torture. And the second one is about human rights violation, which is being very much apparent now with the report that was received about a week or 2 weeks ago from the United Nations. Everybody wants to talk on that theme?
So, Claudio, I don't understand what are we supposed to do. Are we supposed to intervene now and try to answer Santiago's questions, or what is the deal now?
No, I would like to perhaps you could talk a little bit about.
Say it again.
I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the problem of the political prisoners and the human rights violations in Venezuela.
Are you asking me or anybody?
Anybody?
Well, and then I will try to, yes, I can say a couple of things about that. I mean, the situation of political prisoners in Venezuela and human rights. I mean, we have to look at this when Tulio referred as the humanitarian crisis in Venezuela. We have to understand that the destruction of economy in Venezuela and the widespread poverty that now we have, whatever people thought that something was wrong in the country when Chavez won the elections in 98, 99, whatever was bad at that time is orders of magnitude worse now. It's not just that we have 6 million people that has left the country in the last perhaps 10 years. It is also that the destruction of the economy essentially has no parallel in recent history on this planet. So when people like Santiago ask if Venezuela didn't have oil, coltan, gold, would the banks and the military be interested in overthrowing the Venezuelan government? Well, I appreciate Santiago's sincerity. I mean, obviously he's supporting Maduro's regime and Chavez's regime. That's fine. I have nothing against that. But it's you know, for the sake of clarity of this discussion, it would be very nice if somebody who is supportive of this disaster in Venezuela steps in and say, yes, I am supporting. I think that the Maduro's regime is a patriotic regime, and those who are trying to overthrow it, it's against Black Lives Matter, and they are racist, and they are whites living in the United States, and you come with all these prejudices, and that'd be fine, because then we can discuss about what you think, instead of asking all these questions from a perspective that obviously indicate your political preference. So I'm not going to participate in a game of masks where questions are all addressing these issues from this particular perspective, pretending that these are innocent and objective questions, because they are not. Now, that said, everything about human rights in Venezuela that I would like to say is included in the United Nations report, the two reports. One report from the Organization of the United Nations for Human Rights, and the other report, the fact-finding mission about 2 weeks ago. Forget about Almagro, if you don't want to because that was a question also. That Almagro doesn't have the support of Uruguay's government. So what? Almagro has won twice the General Secretary of the Organization of American States. So, but forget about the Organization of American States. The United Nations is not supportive of Guaido governments. There hasn't been a support like the European Union or the Group of Lima for Guaido. So the fact that you have this report from the United Nations, it speaks for itself, because it's not coming from an organization that is supporting the Guaido interim regime. And what it says there is appalling, is really horrible, terrible. It talks about rapes, it talks about tortures, it talks about mutilations, it talks about the specific involvement of high-ranking officers in Maduro regime, but this is not me saying that. It's an independent report coming from the only organization that has been able to get information directly in Venezuela. So I like this discussion, and I think it is unavoidable. But I want people, and I don't know who else, we want to be informative, we want to be transparent, but at the same time, we want to be clear. If you are supporting Maduro's regime, say so, and then we take the discussion from there. Thank you.
¿Podría? ¿Puedo? ¿Me están oyendo?
Sí, dale, sí. Dale.
Ok. Claudio, ayúdame. Dos elementos importantes. Uno, hay dos informes decisivos. Uno, firmado, dirigido por la presidenta o la expresidenta Bachelet, Michelle Bachelet.
There are two reports, and one of them is by Michelet, who is the leader of the issue of human rights.
Una presidenta de izquierda que no puede ser acusada de proimperialista.
She's a left-wing president who cannot be accused of being an imperialist.
Y el informe de hace 15 días de la Comisión Independiente está presidida por una mujer portuguesa que fue la misma que dirigió la investigación sobre los 43 estudiantes desaparecidos en México.
And the second one that appeared not long ago, 15 days ago, comes from an independent commission which is led by a Portuguese lady who was also involved with a report on the 40 students that disappeared in Mexico.
Este informe tiene la particularidad que por primera vez en la historia de América Latina, se acusa no al Estado solamente, sino con nombres y apellidos al Maduro, a Diosdado Cabello, al ministro de la Defensa y al ministro del Interior de crímenes de lesa humanidad.
This is the first time in this history of such reports that they're not accusing a government, but they're accusing individuals. Maduro, Diosdado Cabello, the Minister of Interiors, and the Ministry of
Reverol.
what was the last one?
Interior.
Of the Ministry of Interior, and what's the other one? By names, and they're accused for
Padrino.
crimes, ¿cómo se dice lesa humanidad? Of
Crimes against humanity.
crimes against humanity.
Y por primera vez se incluye de manera explícita casos de aberración sexual, de violación de hombres a hombres, a presos políticos para degradarlos moralmente.
This is the first time in which they mean sexual crimes, in which you have prisoners that have been raped in order to diminish their political stance and to just destroy them.
5.200 ejecuciones extraoficiales, sí, extrajudiciales,
5,200 executions, non-official executions,
750 presos políticos sin debido proceso,
750 political prisoners without due process,
tocar partes y amenazar con mutilación de genitales a mujeres detenidas,
to be touched up and even, causing mutilations of women's sexual parts in order to destroy their political positions.
Lo que estamos viviendo los venezolanos es una de las violaciones sistemáticas más aberradas, grotescas y depravadas en toda la historia de América Latina, incluyendo Pinochet y el comunismo cubano.
What we're living in Venezuela now, the degradation level which we're seeing, the aberrations of all kinds, is something that have never been experienced in the Latin American continent. You cannot compare it even with Pinochet and the other dictatorships of the southern tip of South America. This is something on a different level.
Gracias.
Thank you.
So we also have here with us Natalia Critchley, and I think she had some things that she wanted to add to the conversation.
Yes, hello. I just wanted to add my 2 cents to the conversation about the racial issues in Venezuela as compared to the United States. I guess you can hear from my accent that I'm British in origin. I grew up in London, but I've lived practically all my adult life in Venezuela, nearly 40 years. And we've been here since 2016. So when I first went to Venezuela, I was working in the southeast of the country in an industrial city. We were working in state-sponsored cultural promotion for the people who worked in the industries. And just my general experience in that whole time was that Venezuela is, you can't say there isn't racism, but it's not on the same kind of level that you find here in the States. It's been quite shocking, actually, living in the States since that experience in Venezuela. And I hadn't really put it into perspective until I came here. So Venezuela is quite atypical to a lot of other Latin American countries in a way, and there was certainly a lot of social mobility, which had to do with the democracy in the second half of the last century and the free education, the health programs, and at least where I live, people had jobs. I mean, there was a huge program to diversify from oil, and it was a really interesting place to live and work. So I think it's, obviously I'm simplifying a whole load of issues, but I do think they're just completely different situations. And yes, completely different. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalia. So we've got a few more questions. I think Vladimiro actually touched on the first question from Santiago, which was, if there was no petroleum, gold, lithium, diamonds, and coltan, would the banks and military be interested in overthrowing the government? So did anybody have any more they wanted to add to that from the panel? All right.
I asked that because there are human rights abuses in Colombia, there are human rights abuses in Paraguay, there are human rights abuses in Brazil and in Mexico and in Honduras and in El Salvador. And the American government, nor do the Venezuelan exiles, seem to give much of a damn about those human rights abuses.
Well, I want to add something about the minery in Venezuela. We have a real environmental problem in Venezuela, in the south of Venezuela, because one of the plans of Maduro regime is known as Arco Minero of Orinoco. And this is a huge plan to extract gold, extract coltan, extract a lot of minerals in a protected area of Venezuela. And this plant is really destroying all the south of Venezuela, the Amazonia of Venezuela. And also is the origin of the human rights violation for indigenous people. They are being displaced from their territory. And then it's something that the militaries of Venezuela are involved in this exploitation of this territory. It's a real problem. I don't know if this question has to do with this, but I think it's one of the worst problems that we have with our government right now, with the regime of Maduro.
Yeah. Could I add something there too? Can I?
Yes, go ahead, Vladimiro.
Yeah. So I was, about this question. I was looking, these are the wonders of internet this way. So I believe the one we have been calling here Santiago is actually W.F. Santiago Valles, who is a professor, associate professor in Africana Studies in Western Michigan University. And I understand that somebody with that type of background really has a very legitimate concern about these issues of racial discrimination. And the question he asked again now, or he hinted at, that there are many countries where human rights are violated, and European and the US government, they don't do anything. Of course, including China, Russia. One of my favorite examples of the disregard of the international community for human rights violation was the war in Rwanda. About 1 million people got killed in one year in one of the most horrific episodes. And it is happening in Sudan now. It is happening in Somalia. It is, yes, it is true. There are many countries where this happens. But saying this, it's not the same as saying that they shouldn't get involved in Venezuela for whatever reason. And the reasons are not necessarily coltan and oil. You see, perhaps one needs to understand and insist that Venezuela is not a country with the same type of racial discrimination that apparently Professor Santiago Valles thinks that operate everywhere in Latin America. It's not. My family, but I'm not an exceptional, you know, I look whitish, let's put it that way. In my family, there are some of my brothers, we were 11 brothers and sisters, and all sorts of racial combinations, and that never imply anything. And there are millions of Venezuelan families with that type of background because it is the background of the country. We didn't have, as Tulio insisted, we didn't have that type of racial discrimination background in our country. Venezuela was a country of opportunity for everybody, including Chavez. Chavez was in the military, but once they came into power, they tried to come up with this idea that Venezuela is essentially Black and Indian, and they tried to destroy all our heritage from Spain. So this division of the population, nobody can justify this, and then trying to portray this as a triumph of, you know, of some sort of revolution that tried to amend the inequities, the racial inequities of Venezuelan society. You are absolutely wrong. And whoever, you know, I respect your academic background, but you insist in this line of question. Now, I agree, there are many things in the world, many racial inequities, including in the United States, and very little is done about that. But that doesn't, you know, that the implication of that is that nothing should be done in Venezuela because, you know, they are trying to do that because of the coltan and the oil. No, it's because of the destruction of the country. It's because the Venezuelan regime tries to control our population through fear and hunger. And it was a country that had all the possibilities to make its people happy. So this type of, you know, resort, it's saying, yeah, there are many countries with inequities and nobody gives a damn about that. That's not a justification, because with that type of justification, the world will have evolved into a sort of global tragedy, and it's not a global tragedy. It's something that is evolving in a very complicated way, but there are good things happening on this planet, and not all of them are reduced to racial discrimination. And by the way, I insist that quite often this discourse, this speech of the racial discrimination, what it hides is empowering resentment. And empowering resentment, we have a long, you know, and a very painful lesson about empowering resentment, because that is exactly what Chavez brought into the picture. Resentment as a way of imposing political control.
Thank you, Vladimiro. Tulio, you had something?
Sí. Hay efectivamente, en toda América Latina se violan los derechos humanos, salvo quizás en Uruguay y Costa Rica. Claudio.
It's a reality that in every country of South America, perhaps with the exception of Uruguay, there are human rights violations.
Incluso en la Venezuela previa a Hugo Chávez, los mismos organismos de derechos humanos que hoy denuncian las violaciones del militarismo, las denunciaron contra la democracia.
It's the same organizations, let me, if I get that right, Tulio, that denounce. Can you repeat? ¿Puedes repetirlo?
Incluso las mismas organizaciones que denunciaron violaciones de derechos en la era democrática son las mismas que las denuncian hoy.
The organizations that denounced human rights violations during the democratic period in Venezuela are the same organizations that are denouncing human rights violations at present.
Pero hay una diferencia. La violación de derechos humanos en el presente forma parte de una operación sistemática de exterminio, apartheid y discriminación abierta de todo aquel que no comparta las posturas del régimen. Desde el Estado.
There is a very marked differences from what was done before and what's taking place at the moment, because definitely there is a definite trend to create a discrimination and apartheid, particularly based on people that don't actually agree with them. There is a systematic extermination of that.
En Colombia, donde vivo exiliado por una orden de cárcel de Maduro en mi contra,
Now that I live in Colombia, due to an expressive order from Maduro to put me into prison,
se violan los derechos humanos desde 4 fuentes: la violencia guerrillera, la violencia paramilitar, la violencia del narcotráfico y la violencia del Estado.
in a country now in Colombia, there are human rights violations from 4 sources: from the left-wing guerrillas, from the paramilitary, from the drug cartels, and from the state.
En Venezuela, el único violador acusado con pruebas es el Estado a través de su gobierno, con el apoyo de tecnologías iraníes, cubanas, y rusas y turcas.
In the case of Venezuela, there is a single human rights violator, that is the government, using technologies and methods they have obtained from Iran, from
Turquía,
Turkey,
Rusia
Russia,
y el G2 cubano.
and the G2 from Cuba.
Eso es novedoso en América Latina.
This is very new in Latin America.
Por eso es que nunca se habían levantado tantos informes tan bien hechos que demuestran una escala de violación diferente a todos los demás países.
This is the reason why there are so many very good and very precise reports that this is happening, because this has not happened before in Latin America.
Gracias.
All right, thank you. We've got another question that's come from Fabiola. I'm going to actually ask Claudio if he can assist again, because she's sent that in Spanish.
What is it? Organizations for the defense of the human rights, like Provea y COPFABIC, organization of victims of El Caracazo, were created before the Chavista regime. Today, they defend oppositions, opposing citizens, as well as what they call dissident Chavistas or Chavista dissidents, when they have been victims.
I put it in, Claudio, I
Human rights.
translated and put it in the chat.
Ah, yes, here it is in English.
Oh, thank you. All right, so I think this was a clarification. I think everyone can read that in the chat. I don't want to insult you and read it out loud, but is everyone seeing the chat?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. All right. We do have one more question, and this is coming again from Santiago. There's another one, but this one in particular, I think one of our panelists had talked about the migration from Venezuela to Colombia and as a comparison in the reverse, Colombia to Venezuela. So Santiago, I wondered if you could, if there was something else behind that question or if that question was answered in the presentation.
The question that I had was that according to the London Guardian, in the last year, over 100,000 Venezuelans as of July of this year, 100,000 Venezuelans in Colombia have returned to Venezuela, and there are, compared to the 4 million Venezuelans that live outside the country, there are 6 million Colombians living in Venezuela. If the percentage of exiles, which is 4 million Venezuelans outside the country, is a human rights tragedy, how does it compare with the human rights tragedy of the Colombians who are living in Venezuela or are internally displaced, which is the largest number in Latin America?
Me perdona, Claudio, ¿me ayudas?
Yes.
Yo creo que es profesor Santiago Vallés, porque no sé si un profesor puede manejar la data de la manera como él la está manejando. Nunca ha existido 6 millones de colombianos en Venezuela.
I don't know if, I mean, you speak Spanish, Santiago.
Por supuesto que sí.
Bueno, te explico. Santiago, por
Yo
favor.
estoy citando del London Guardian de
No.
julio de este año.
Yo vivo aquí, trabajo en la Universidad del Rosario, soy asesor de ALNUR, trabajo con la Fundación Gabriel García Márquez, soy de la frontera, mi familia vive en el Táchira y nunca en la historia de Venezuela han vivido 6 millones de colombianos. En este momento han retornado a Colombia 563,000 reportados. Y a Venezuela regresaron al comienzo de la pandemia 78,000 registrados que fueron maltratados por Maduro, acusados de bioterroristas, muchos llevados a la cárcel y las carreteras del Táchira desde hace una semana están llenas de venezolanos que se fueron y están retornando de nuevo de manera desesperada. Además, porque son acusados de traidores por el gobierno. En este momento, el reporte de colombianos oficial, estadísticamente, que quedan en Venezuela, de los 3.800.000 que alguna vez hubo, no llega ni a 500,000. La cifra de gente que tiene que abandonar, además de los que maltrató Maduro hace exactamente 5 años, tumbando su casa y expulsándolos una noche a través del río, a la manera como lo hacía el fascismo en Alemania, es un hecho inocultable. Yo le sugiero al señor Vallés, le voy a dar mi dirección para ayudarlo a que no cometa estos errores que lo desprestigian por manejar una data inconsistente.
Bueno, como usted es más viejo que yo no le voy a echar la bronca. A usted le puede echar la bronca al London Guardian, del cual yo estaba citando, del 4 de julio de este año.
Muy bien, la edad es una maravilla.
Bueno, pues échale la bronca al Guardian.
Okay, I don't know whether we have another question. Sid, I think we probably got to the end. Everybody sort of.
Okay, so we're at the end of our time, and I do want to thank everybody again for attending today, for your contributions. And we will send out our links to the video. You can check our website, vicksburgarts.com. It will be there within a couple of days, probably. Any final comments from the panelists before we let you go?
Well, yes, a final comment. I would like to express my gratitude for this invitation. As I said in my initial statement, or my initial words, I think this type of exchange, even if they get a little bit hot at some point, I think are very important for Venezuela, are very important in keeping this as an open issue in this country and any other country. We have been participating in this type of exchanges, and I think one must respect some other people's opinions and all this, but this is very important for us, and I cannot thank you enough for putting this event together, and of course also to Claudio, but Claudio is Venezuelan, like almost all of us here, at least all the speakers, but I think that what you are doing is extremely important for us, and I want to express my gratitude for that.
I would also thanks a lot for this opportunity and the opportunity to meet these old friends, really old.
No, come on, speak for yourself.
No. Okay, thanks a lot for the organizers, for the two ways, the opportunity to see my cousin Marielba and those guys, and the opportunity to talk to you all. Thanks a lot.
I want to say thank you too, but I think Diana wants to say something.
No, I'm not the no, I'm a participant. I just wanted really, again, I really think it's very important what Claudio organized, because I'm from Venezuela, and I've been living in Chicago for already 8 years, no? And with Claudio and Natasha and me, we're always speaking about the situation of Venezuela, of course, but this is important because what I am afraid about the situation in Venezuela is what we could call fatigue. A fatigue that you can see it in the country, and it's human, it's natural, you get used to living the way you live sometimes. But it's also fatigue from its politicians, in and out, and of us. I feel that sometimes I'm fatigued about the Venezuelan situation. And I know that people around me that used to ask, friends of mine that used to ask me constantly, how is the situation in Venezuela and what's happening? They're not doing it anymore, because Venezuela has not been in the front pages lately. It hasn't, with the exception of this last one of the UN, really. At least in the United States, it hasn't. So this type of initiative that Claudio had, and it would be very, very useful if it could be, replicated in other parts, because I think there is a fatigue. I think that's the word I can use. I cannot use any other word after 21 years of this horrible nightmare that Venezuela is living. Okay, so thank you very much to all, the four of you also.
Thank you, Diana. All right. I think that's the end of our time here then. Oh, sorry, Luis, did you have something, or Marielba? No, okay. All right then. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Keep up the
thanks,
good
Jane.
work, panelists.
Thank you very much
Thank
to the
you.
panelists and the participants.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you to all of you. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Thanks a lot.
Adiós, gracias.
Adiós.
Bye.
Adiós.
Gracias a
Bye-bye.
todos.